My name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. This is the weekly update. Today is Thursday. It's February 20th, 2025. Today is day 503. So a weekly update. This week marked more than 500 days, but Monday, February 17th was 500 days since October 7th of 2023. Today is 503 days. Today was significant. There were the bodies of 4 hostages returned back to Israel. I'll give a summary of the most significant news of this past week. So today, 4 hostages' bodies were returned back to Israel. It was indicated that the 2 youngest hostages who were killed over this past year, presumably Hamas had indicated from Israeli bombardment, but Shiri, Babas, and her young children, Kiffer and Ariel, who were aged 9 months and 4 years old when they were kidnapped by Hamas on the October 7th, 2023 attacks. Their bodies were returned in addition to an elderly Israeli gentleman. That was a part of the hostage agreement. Phase 1 is set to end soon in the first couple of days of March. The final release of hostages will be this Saturday. 6 living Israeli hostages are set to be released on Saturday. The Israeli families of those who are being released have been notified. I wanted to just share about 2 of those hostages specifically. One of them is named Abara Mengitsu. He's the longest held living hostage who's been in Gaza. His family said that in a state of mental instability, he scaled the security barrier in 2014 and entered the Gaza Strip, where he was questioned by Hamas, and then he was held for 10 years. So he has been held in Gaza for 10 years, and then another one of those being released, his name is Hisham al-Sayed. He is the second longest held living Israeli hostage. He was held in Gaza for 9 years. El-Sayed has been, he suffers from schizophrenia. He's been held since 2015, captured by Hamas. He's a Bedouin from the Negev, from the El-Sayed tribe. He's been held for 9 years in Gaza. As of yesterday, the total number of Palestinians released in the hostage prisoner exchange is 1,135 Palestinian prisoners freed from Israeli prisons. And there's the amount scheduled to be released this week is an additional 502 Palestinian prisoners. A number of those are held under administrative detention. A number of those have had no trial or due process. Others have been convicted of crimes or have had charges brought against them. After last week's handover, the number of captives, hostages that have been released has been 25. You'll recall the total number set to be released was 33. So this past Saturday, this last week, 3 hostages were released. They were from the kibbutz near Oz. One of those was an Israeli American. His name was Sagi Dekel Chen. He was an American Israeli dual national. 369 Palestinian prisoners and detainees were released last week. Dekel Chen's wife was pregnant when he was kidnapped. He was the father of 3 and had not yet met his newborn child when he was released. On Friday, a week ago, President Trump reiterated his call that all hostages should be released at the same time. He said that when he was in the Oval Office. He said that the day before the hostage prisoner exchange was supposed to happen. Trump, made the comparison of the hostage to Holocaust survivors in his statements. Trump also said that he would take a hard stance on Gaza. He said that on Saturday, we didn't really know what that would mean. Late last week and early last week, you may recall that Hamas said that Israel was not honoring the ceasefire agreement. And there were several days last week where we weren't sure whether or not the hostage exchange would proceed. And there were concerns about that. Then Trump called for the release of all the hostages and Netanyahu followed suit. And so there there was a big concern about whether or not the ceasefire agreement would proceed. Things did work out despite Trump's rhetoric, and Netanyahu, the Israelis, and Hamas worked things out kind of last hours prior to the exchanges, and the hostages and the prisoner exchange proceeded. A former Palestinian detainee that was released last Saturday said he was subjected to torture and hunger while in prison. The Israeli military rejected those claims. Many human rights organizations claim and have cited evidence of torture and hunger in Israeli prisons. The uncle of the freed hostage, Ofer Calderon, said that a few months before his release, he weighed 25 kilograms or less, and said that his captors realized Ofer would be among those released, and they stuffed him with food. It was announced yesterday that Hamas made a radical offer seeking to bring all of the negotiations related to hostages to an end. They said Hamas would release all the remaining captives in phase 2, those dead and alive, for a complete end to Israel's war on Gaza, that it would result in a lasting and comprehensive ceasefire agreement and a full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Hamas suggested they were open to releasing the remaining captives in one go. They rejected the reasons for why Israel could not withdraw from the Gaza Strip. In addition, Hamas explained the reason for why 6 captives are being freed this coming Saturday. It was supposed to be 3. They increased that number to 6. This decision was announced by the Hamas leader Khalil al-Hayya on Tuesday of this week. This was in an apparent bid to accelerate the implementation of phase 2. Hamas wants to show their seriousness, that they want to progress to phase 2, that they're coming to the negotiating table, ready to put their cards on the table. So they wanted to show, their seriousness and their willingness to make the deal. Negotiations for phase 2 were set to begin this week. Israel and Hamas will open negotiations on a second stage of the Gaza ceasefire deal, said Israel's foreign minister, Sahar. He announced that yesterday. Of course, phase 2 was supposed to start negotiations several weeks ago and had not as of yet. On Tuesday of this week, Netanyahu shifted his head of the Israeli negotiating team. He removed the Mossad chief, David Barnea, and the Shin Bet chief, Ronan Bar. They were the heads of the negotiating team for Israel. And on Tuesday, he appointed the strategic affairs minister, Ron Dermer, to lead the talks. Dermer is a confidant of Netanyahu, and he also has very strong ties to the Trump White House. The emergency Arab summit in Cairo was postponed. It was supposed to happen on February 27th. It was said that it would be postponed for about a week. There were technical and logistical reasons for this postponement. It's said that it will now take place during the month of Ramadan. The summit is expected to include direct and indirect discussions at the level of the country's leaders on the issue of providing an economic safety net specifically for Egypt and Jordan in light of President Trump's threats that all of the population of Gaza his threat that the population of Gaza would be relocated. What's happening in Gaza right now? Despite the ceasefire, at least 3 Palestinians have been killed and 11 injured in the last 24 hours by Israeli attacks across the Strip, according to the health ministry there. Israel will start allowing the entry of mobile homes for displaced Palestinians into Gaza, an official said this week. Hamas has previously accused Israel of delaying deliveries. This was one of the reasons for the tentative nature of the ceasefire agreement last week. Aid workers and medics have said that they fear Palestinians are leaving Gaza for medical treatment, that they might not be allowed to return. This is in light specifically of President Trump's proposals to displace all of the territory's inhabitants. Hamas has said that they are not going to disarm and that they are regrouping in Gaza. This was from a spokesperson and a political bureau member. They said this last Saturday. This was contradicting an earlier statement from a different spokesperson of Hamas that said that the group was not clinging to power. On Monday, the Israeli Defense Forces said that they fired warning shots at suspicious vehicles in Gaza. They called on Palestinians specifically to pass through the ceasefire's agreed upon routes, and the Israeli Air Force fired warning shots at vehicles that were traveling north from central Gaza on a route that was not approved for vehicle traffic without passing through the required checkpoints, said the IDF. On Sunday, the IDF conducted an airstrike in central Gaza against suspicious vehicles that were driving north, and 2 Palestinian policemen were killed and another was wounded in an Israeli airstrike near Rafah in South Gaza on a report that came out on Sunday morning. There were numerous updates throughout this past week in the occupied West Bank. On Saturday, February 15th, it was reported that Israel had detained at least 380 Palestinians during raids in the Northwest Bank cities, particularly around the area of Jenin and in areas of refugee camps since January 21st of 2025. This was when the Israeli military began its long-lasting raid in the occupied West Bank. This was the longest lasting incursion of the Israeli military in the last 20 years. The Israeli Defense Forces said that it was targeting militants in places like Jenin, Tubas, and Tulkarem. Residents and rights groups have said that civilians have been killed or arrested in the raids and that more than 40,000 people have been displaced by the Israeli military operation in just over 3 weeks. A left-wing activist was detained in the occupied West Bank after participating in a joint Israeli-Palestinian tree planting event in the past few days. And Israel's ongoing military campaign has triggered the most significant displacement of Palestinians from the occupied West Bank since 1967. Palestinian and Israeli experts said that this week, the New York Times reported. I don't know if you've been following, but one of the things that's been happening is that the Israeli military placed explosion devices around the camps in Jenin and some of the refugee camps there. And the Israeli military insists that this was not civilian homes. The Palestinians report that the families were warned before this happened. And so families moved out of their homes and then their homes were exploded and detonated. And so when we're talking about tens of thousands of Palestinians being displaced, we're talking about their homes being destroyed in these refugee camps. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, the United States froze foreign assistance that has been extended to the Palestinian Authority's security forces. The security forces are not popular because they collaborate with the Israeli security forces. The freeze came as the Palestinian Authority struggled to maintain its rule in pockets of the West Bank, and it's been jockeying to govern the post-war Gaza Strip. The PA has said that it was willing to take control of the Gaza Strip, but it's also struggling just to control Palestinian militancy in the West Bank. That is centered on the territory's northern refugee camps and draws its support from widespread frustration with the aging leadership of the Palestinian Authority, which of course is headed by President Mahmoud Abbas, who currently is 89 years old. Israel is advancing plans for more than 1,000 settler homes in the West Bank. Peace Now reported that this week. There was an announcement that 974 new housing units will be built in the Efrat settlement. That's an expansion of 40%. Efrat is the settlement block that is nearby the Palestinian city of Bethlehem. In Israel on Monday, thousands of Israelis held a rally that marked 500 days since the October 7th attacks. This happened in Hostage Square near the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. Yael, the mother of the American Israeli hostage Eden Alexander, emphasized the urgency of returning all of the hostages home in a comprehensive and sequential deal. That was one of the reasons for the increase of the 3 to 6 on Saturday, for example. Prime Minister's spokesperson Omer Dostri said earlier this week that the Palestinian Authority's control of Gaza is not going to happen. This was in a response that Hamas said they were willing to give over control to the Palestinian Authority. And the Israelis, according to the Prime Minister's office, said that they rejected that plan. The Defense Minister of Israel, Katz, announced that Israel will establish a special administration to advance Gazans, quote, voluntary immigration for residents to leave the Gaza Strip. Quote, the plan includes extensive assistance that will allow any resident of Gaza who wishes to voluntarily emigrate to a third country to receive an envelope that will include, among other things, special exit arrangements by sea, air, and land, end quote, the statement said. On Monday, military sources announced that the IDF is preparing 4 divisions They said that the 162nd Division, which has ended its deployment in North Gaza and the security zone there on Monday, that it will prepare to return to combat during stage 2 if the hostage deal falls through. In terms of the broader Middle East, the Lebanese, Hezbollah, and Israel ceasefire agreement came to an end this past weekend. It expired officially, I believe, on Tuesday, February 18th. Prior to that, on Saturday, February 15th, unknown assailants attacked a convoy of the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, known as UNIFIL. This happened near the Beirut airport. I think it happened on Friday and was reported on Saturday that a vehicle was set on fire, injuring the force's deputy commander, according to UNIFIL. The Lebanese government was looking for the attackers, stating that such an act of violence threatens the safety of the UN staff who work tirelessly to maintain the stability of Lebanon, sometimes at great personal risk. Israel on Monday killed a Hamas leader in South Lebanon's Sidon area. This was during the ceasefire. It was still in effect. And then on Tuesday, the ceasefire officially expired, but Israel said that their troops would remain in 5 different South Lebanese locations after the deadline elapsed. That was announced by the Israeli military, saying that they had done so with the coordination of the United States. Now, the U.S. was still encouraging Israel to withdraw, saying that if anything happened, they could still attack by air. In response to the announcement that the IDF would remain at 5 specific locations in South Lebanon, the Lebanese government Tuesday said that it considers any Israeli presence on its soil an occupation and reserves the right to use all means to ensure Israel's withdrawal. The Lebanese leaders called on the UN Security Council to take action. There's not been news that I've seen in the past couple of days of any further escalations, but all of what's been happening with Hezbollah and Israel has been tentative. You should know that I believe it was last week or the week before that the Lebanese government called on Hezbollah to disarm and said that the Lebanese army would be the only one that should be armed within the state of Lebanon. Related to Iran, a senior Iranian official of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said that Iran would retaliate in due time to Israel's attacks from last October. So that was reported from Iran's Mehr news agency on Monday. And Israel, in Israeli news, their foreign minister, Sa'ar, said that there are worrying developments in terms of Iran's nuclear project that stem from Iran wanting to compensate for its weakened regional influence by obtaining nuclear weapons. He said this during a congressional delegation when he was meeting with U.S. senators in his office in Jerusalem. He said this also in the presence of one of U.S. President Trump's delegates, Morgan Ortagus. Moving on to the U.S. government. On Sunday, there were news reports that indicated that U.S. heavy bombs have arrived in Israel. The Defense Ministry announced the shipment of Mk-84 heavy bombs, which were previously delayed by the Biden administration. They arrived in Israel following the approval of the U.S. President Donald Trump. According to the report, the transfer of 4,700 bombs that weigh approximately 450 kilograms and are worth about $700 million, as well as D9 bulldozers worth about $300 million that had been approved. Also, this past Sunday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio kicked off his first Middle East tour as Secretary of State. He had strong support for Israel and stern warnings for Iran as the region bristled from Donald Trump's proposal to own Gaza and evict its Palestinian population. I did find at least one statement where Donald Trump said that we would buy Gaza, but that was kind of the exception to his statements of us taking over the Gaza Strip. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Jerusalem. They were supposed to deliver a joint statement. It did not get much press, but I found mention of it on Fox News, stating how much Rubio and Netanyahu both highlighted that Iran is the single largest obstacle to peace in the region. They said that in a joint statement. While Netanyahu did not comment directly on Trump's specific plans for Gaza, Secretary of State Rubio emphasized that the U.S. and Israel cannot return to tired strategies that have failed to produce peace in the past. Rubio met with his counterpart Gideon Sa'ar, as well as the president of Israel, Herzog and the opposition leader Yair Lapid. Secretary of State Rubio, National Security Advisor Waltz, and Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff also met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia earlier this week, who, by the way, rejected the U.S.'s perspective and held out, saying that a Palestinian state does have to be declared before there will be any normalization agreement with Israel. The U.S. met with the Crown Prince to discuss Gaza and Ukraine, according to the State Department. And in the past 2 weeks, Trump has suggested, as you know, that the Palestinians prefer to remain in Gaza because, quote, they don't know anything else. They've never had an alternative, end quote. The Washington Post did an interview with Ghassan Salem, who was born and raised in the Gaza Strip, who said leaving is not a choice he would ever consider. He said, the land of Gaza contains my life, my memories, and my everything. I wanted to let you know that U.S. senators from both parties have criticized President Donald Trump's plans to take over Gaza. There was a congressional delegation in Israel this past week. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said there's very little appetite in the U.S. Senate for the U.S. to take over Gaza in any way, shape, or form. He added that Israeli officials have indicated that they support allowing Palestinians to leave voluntarily, but he emphasized that there would be no forcible expulsions. And Democratic Senator Rich Blumenthal called Trump's proposal not a plan, not a starter, but a hot mess. He also noted that King Abdullah of Jordan has convinced me that the plan that the Arab states will present to President Trump is realistic, further stating that the Arab proposal could be a game changer for the region. In terms of church affairs, I wanted to let you know that yesterday, the patriarchs and heads of churches of Jerusalem put out a statement in solidarity as they condemned the unjust foreclosure against the Armenian Patriarchate and urged immediate intervention. We're seeking to find out more about this, if it is a specific building of the Patriarchate, if it's the Patriarchate as a whole. This is the Armenian Patriarchate in the Armenian quarter of the Old City of Jerusalem. The municipality of Jerusalem issued a foreclosure against the Armenian Patriarchate based on an unverified and exorbitant Arnona tax debt. I could talk more about that if you have questions. What the Arnona tax debt is referring to. The statement from the heads of churches says this. This is a direct quote. It is inconceivable that Christian institutions, whose mission for centuries has been to safeguard faith, serve communities, and preserve the sacred heritage of the Holy Land, should now face the threat of property seizure under the Israeli administrative measures that disregard due process. Particularly alarming is the municipality's attempt to enforce a debt determination without judicial scrutiny, and in defiance of the governmental committee established to negotiate such matters in good faith. This reckless move jeopardizes the Orthodox Armenian Patriarchate and sets a perilous precedent that could imperil Christian institutions throughout the Holy Land. So that is an update of what's happened in this past week, summarizing what's happened in Gaza and in Israel and the broader Middle East.